Hello guys, welcome back. Today I'm gonna actually make a big announcement before we get into the trade rumors. First things first, I will be live on the Sportsnet YouTube channel on Monday covering the NHL trade deadline live in front of you beautiful people. I'm pretty sure that'll start around 12 p.m. Eastern, and then we have about 3 hours to go until the trade deadline is over. So catch up on the Sportsnet YouTube channel, and when the trade deadline day is here, go over there and I'll be streaming on that channel. It's gonna be an absolute blast, so I hope to see you there. But at the topic at hand today, we're going to be talking about a bunch of trade rumors that have come up, especially over the past day. We got our first trade of trade deadline week with the Josh Manson deal, which I also covered on the Sportsnet YouTube channel. But there's a lot that's been coming out on the Canucks, the Penguins, the Habs, and more that I really wanted to talk about. So what are the latest NHL trade rumors today, and what trades could possibly go down in the next little bit? Watch till the end for all the latest trade rumors and all the latest news, and make sure you hit that subscribe button if you are new. 50% of the people that are watching are not subscribed. If you like hockey, this channel is the place to be. Now, first things first, we're going to be talking about a couple of trade rumors involving the Red Wings, the Canucks, and the Pittsburgh Penguins. Recently, David Pagnotta was on NHL Network talking about potential additions that the Penguins could use on their top six, especially with players with longer term. The Penguins are looking to add a top six forward and fast.
It sounds like General Manager Ron Hextall wants a top six scoring winger to add to his group right now. Who do you see the Penguins going after?
I believe, for the most part, Conor Garland is the guy that may be discussed the most out of Vancouver. Not necessarily Besser or JT Miller, but another player, Tyler Bertuzzi, out of Detroit, that a few teams have expressed a lot of interest in the past, have circled back again. Those are the caliber of players, controllability with term on their deals, with solid cap hits, that the Pittsburgh Penguins are looking at as potential options.
Now, this was especially interesting because David Pagnotta in this mentioned Marcus Pettersson or potentially John Marino as more of cap players to make a deal like this work. But if they were to bring on Conor Garland, which David Pagnotta says is the most likely addition, they wouldn't have to really give up all that much. When it comes to Conor Garland, he makes $4.9 million for the next 5 years, and the Penguins, in terms of deadline cap space, have $4.75 to work with. So, in theory, if Jason Zucker were to stay on LTIR until the playoffs, the cap would work if they were to just give up a minimum league salary deal and make that happen. And especially for the Canucks, with how willing they are to give up a guy like Conor Garland, I feel like he'd fit perfectly in that Penguin system, and I feel like a trade involving Pittsburgh and Vancouver is pretty realistic at this point. Now, the defenseman that Vancouver has been linked to in a potential Garland or even Brock Besser trade has been John Marino from the Pittsburgh Penguins. Marcus Pettersson is an option, but Marino is really the guy that Vancouver wants, and it's easy to see why. He also is locked up pretty well long term with a 6-year deal at $4.4 million. He's 24 years old right now and has a lot of value going into the future, even though I feel like this year he's taking a little bit of a step back, especially offensively. His defensive play is still pretty solid, and the skating he has and the awareness he has, I think, still warrants him being a potential top 4 D-man, and especially in a new team with new scenery, I feel like him in a Vancouver Canucks system could work out pretty well, and honestly, that would be the one guy I would especially want in a trade with Conor Garland. But the problem becomes for Pittsburgh, if they don't have to give up a player like that, why would you? And personally, I think for the Pens, I would rather keep a guy like Marino around, especially with the talent he has and the cap that he has. He'd be a guy that I would definitely not be too willing to give up. Marcus Pettersson, on the other hand, I think would be a guy I would love to be able to give up in a Conor Garland trade, and I feel like that's maybe a little bit more realistic. But if it is a John Marino and that's it type of trade, then I think it could look more like a one-for-one type deal, honestly. And looking at both players, especially with how Marino is locked up long-term too, I'm not even sure where the value would really lie. I don't know if the Canucks add more or the Penguins add more. It could actually be a pretty even trade, and looking at it now, thinking about it, it wouldn't be the craziest thing to just see this be a one-for-one trade. Now, the thing is, for the Penguins, they aren't exactly looking for players long-term, but more so players that at least are signed until next season. And the other player that David Pagnotta mentioned here was Tyler Bertuzzi from the Detroit Red Wings, who is a pretty interesting fit. He's signed to a $4.75 million contract for this year and next, and if you were paying attention, the Penguins right now in deadline cap space have $4.75 million to work with. So in theory, it would be an exact fit. At the same time, it would be an interesting trade for Steve Yzerman to make with Tyler Bertuzzi. He's been fantastic when he has played, especially early on in the season with Lucas Raymond, and he's a player that on this Pittsburgh team, I think could be another player that fits pretty well. Brings not so much like a ruggedness to the game, but a very energetic and exciting factor into it. I think he'd be a very good addition and a very interesting one on that top six in Pittsburgh. And again, I feel like he's the type of player that come playoff time would excel and be even better in his overall game. He's an interesting one though, but I feel like for the Red Wings, especially to get a player like John Marino is a must in a Bertuzzi trade, especially if they have the opportunity. With this Red Wings core, they're still looking to add to that defense, especially for the now. And a guy like John Marino, if I was Steve Yzerman, would be the guy to target. Now, there's quite a few other trade rumors to talk about. One of the first ones here involves the Montreal Canadiens. Obviously, we know Ben Chiarot is likely to get dealt at this deadline, and the Canadiens are making sure that he'll be healthy for it. They pretty much confirmed, and Frank Cervelli has confirmed this at this point, that they will likely be sitting Ben Chiarot for all the games until the trade deadline at least, to make sure that Ben Chiarot is healthy 100% and way more enticing for NHL GMs. It's the right decision, it's what should happen, and it's a smart move by the Habs management group. We'll see what happens and how quick a trade will actually be made, but again, it feels like for Ben Chiarot, a trade is going to happen. Now, his value has kind of been all over the place, and we got some reports that the Habs aren't getting as many great offers as they expected, so he might not get a first-round pick per se, but I could still see Ben Chiarot getting a second and maybe a decent prospect back and still be getting way more than he probably should. At the same time, for contending teams with how good he was in the playoffs last year, how well he can block shots and play physically, he is still a super enticing defenseman on those aspects, and that's why he will get a lot of the deadline. So for Montreal, it's likely going to happen and be a pretty big trade at that. And then we also have the Artturi Lehkonen situation, which has been wild. He got injured in the last week, but is practicing now and hopefully is close to being back. He's another guy I could see the Montreal Canadiens potentially sitting. He's been so good over the last couple of months, really showing the value that he can provide as a great depth scorer and great overall force, and he's another player the Montreal Canadiens will likely get a lot for. I could potentially see Lehkonen even getting more than Ben Chiarot just because of his great consistency this year and just the overall aspects he provides. A lot of teams are looking to get their Blake Coleman and Barclay Goodrow, and I think Artturi Lehkonen is the best player in that mold this year. Now, there were a couple rumors as well of the Edmonton Oilers. Ryan Rishaug pointing to a potential upgrade on the right side of defense. Justin Braun and, of course, Carson Soucy of the Seattle Kraken as potential options there. Both of those guys, I think, would fit pretty well in Edmonton's system. I think especially Justin Braun, who's having a pretty underratedly solid defensive year on a pretty inept Philadelphia Flyers team. I honestly would like those couple of additions for Edmonton. He also goes on to say a goalie option and an upgrade there could be possible, but again, only if the Oilers get a clear upgrade and the deal is able to be a win for them. So at this point, I feel like the Oilers were going to trade for a goaltender. It would have already happened, so it feels like more of a defensive specialist guy will be the player that Edmonton targets. Now, there was also a couple of interesting updates on the Winnipeg Jets from Ken Wibby of Sportsnet, talking about both Andrew Copp and Paul Stastny and where their future lies as UFAs this year, and he says this: Andrew Copp and or Paul Stastny as a self-rental does not extend the window of contention for this group. Not without a contract extension for either player anyway, and it would appear the chances of that happening for either versatile forward would currently fall in the slim to none category right now. So we've kind of talked about Paul Stastny and Andrew Copp as potential trade pieces at this deadline before, but it feels like both of those guys should at least be traded by the Jets, especially since it seems like a contract extension for either of them is just not going to happen. So for Winnipeg, they could be in this kind of transitional period where they might go in a more retooling route. I think that's probably what they should do, especially with just the awful chemistry it feels like in that locker room. But especially with those two guys and Andrew Copp specifically, you could get quite a bit for them, and I feel like that's untapped potential for the Winnipeg Jets. Again, a contract extension doesn't seem likely at this point, and if a trade does happen, those two guys could be one of the bigger centers, especially in the trade market available. Now, we got an interesting update on the New York Rangers as well from, of course, Larry Brooks, who I'm not the biggest fan of in the world, but at the same time, he provides an update on what the Rangers might be thinking with this deadline, and he says this: Drury needs to bide his time and keep his best tradable assets for a rainy day. And by the way, if Scheifele and Horvat were available now, it would be worth a slight overpay to keep them off an expanded summer market and get something done before the deadline. And we've kind of seen as well over the past couple of days some rumors about the Rangers moving on potentially from JT Miller, maybe targeting smaller forwards and not going as into this year as they originally thought, which I feel like with the Rangers play over the past couple of weeks might be the smartest thing. I feel like I've kind of gotten a little bit pessimistic about this Rangers team recently, just with how lackluster and consistent they've been recently, but I feel like with the Rangers management group, they might be in the same way as well. If they are going to wait until the offseason to go for a bigger target, that might make more sense, especially with guys like Lafreniere still developing as they are, and you could get even better theoretically next season. I mean, let's be honest, Igor Shesterkin has carried the Rangers a lot throughout this year, and even though goaltending can carry you, like we've seen with Henrik Lundqvist, it doesn't automatically result in Stanley Cup wins. And I feel like for this Rangers team, they would need to get up a couple of huge additions, probably on a defense and forward, to get to even some good playoff success. And obviously, it doesn't seem like the Rangers are too energetic about making that happen, and especially with JT Miller likely not being an option anymore, for the Rangers, it feels like their chances of being huge buyers are almost done at this point. Now, there's also one last rumor I want to talk about here involving the Carolina Hurricanes. They were a team that many expected to be a huge buyer at this deadline, but it feels like now that they'll be a lot more quiet than initially expected. This is coming from Jim Parsons of The Hockey Writer, paraphrasing Frank Seravalli, and he said this. Frank Seravalli of Daily Faceoff thinks Don Waddell of the Carolina Hurricanes will be in a lot of discussion and conversations, but doesn't think he'll do much at the deadline this season, saying there's not an obvious name the Hurricanes would willingly move off the roster to make cap room for somebody else. This version of the team is the one that will likely make a run. Then he says this, Seravalli does believe Vincent Trocheck will likely leave in the offseason, and Jesperi Kotkaniemi will fill his role. So as a middle six centerman, Vincent Trocheck apparently will be off the roster going into free agency, and Kotkaniemi is the next in line. And we heard obviously the long-term extension that Kotkaniemi is signing in Carolina. That is likely what Carolina is going to go after, and personally for me, I'd much rather have Trocheck than Kotkaniemi, but it feels like for right now, there could maybe be a couple of depth moves for Carolina, but at the same time, this roster that we see now is likely what we're going to get come playoff time. But that'll be it for today, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in into the latest trade rumor roundup. If you did enjoy all the latest news, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Comment down below, what do you guys think of all these trade rumors? What moves do you guys see your favorite team making? What players do you think will get traded next? Let me know your thoughts. Comment down below all those thoughts down below, and make sure you share this video with your friends. Get the latest trade rumors out there, and click on this card for all of my hockey trade rumor content right in one playlist. My name is Nathan. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.